Our Black grandparents didn't have central heating that could warm an entire house with the push of a button. Many lived in homes where landlords ignored needed repairs, and drafts crept through every crack. When blizzards buried northern cities, they could not always count on snowplows reaching their neighborhoods first. So they learned to count on each other and on the wisdom their own parents had passed down. They turned necessity into knowledge and scarcity into survival. Today, we are looking at 25 old school methods our Black grandparents used to stay alive when winter turned deadly. Let us begin with clothing layers. Before synthetic thermal wear and insulated jackets became widely available, our Black grandparents understood something fundamental about staying warm. It wasn't about wearing one thick coat. It was about trapping air between multiple layers of fabric. They would start with a cotton undershirt, add a wool sweater if they had one, then perhaps a flannel shirt, and finally an outer layer to block the wind. Each layer created a pocket of air that body heat would warm, creating natural insulation. If they were working hard and started to sweat, they could remove a layer. When they stopped moving and the cold began creeping in, they'd add layers back. This wasn't about fashion. This was physics they understood through hard experience. Children learned early to dress this way, and it became second nature to everyone who lived through harsh winters. Many families made do with hand-me-downs and repurposed fabric, cutting old coats into layers that could be worn underneath newer ones. Wool blankets were treasured possessions in Black households throughout the early 20th century. Wool has a remarkable property that no other natural material can match. It retains warmth even when wet. During a blizzard, when snow might blow through cracks in walls, or when someone came in from outside covered in white powder, a wool blanket would still keep you warm. Families would pile these blankets on beds, sometimes 4 or 5 deep. They would hang them over doorways to block drafts between rooms. Many of these blankets were handmade, knitted or woven by grandmothers who understood their value. A good wool blanket could last decades with proper care, and families passed them down through generations like the heirlooms they were. The scratch of wool against skin might not have been pleasant, but it was the feeling of survival, of warmth that money could not always buy. Sleeping arrangements during blizzards looked nothing like what we know today. Whole families would share beds during the worst cold snaps, with the youngest children placed in the middle where body heat concentrated. This was not seen as crowded or uncomfortable. It was practical wisdom. Parents on the outside served as barriers against the cold that crept through walls. Older children learned to sleep still so they would not steal covers from younger siblings. This closeness built bonds that lasted lifetimes. Families who slept together through brutal winters developed a rhythm, a way of moving and breathing that kept everyone warm through the longest nights. Bringing animals into sleeping areas was common practice during extreme cold. Dogs and cats generate significant body heat, and our grandparents knew this was a resource not to be wasted. A large dog sleeping at the foot of the bed could raise the temperature under blankets noticeably. Cats would curl up against children, providing warmth through long winter nights. Farm families in rural areas would sometimes bring smaller livestock into enclosed porches or mudrooms during the worst blizzards, not just to save the animals, but because their body heat helped warm adjacent spaces. This was not seen as unsanitary or strange. It was practical survival, a partnership between humans and animals that benefited everyone involved. The wood stove or coal stove was not just for cooking, it was the heart of the home in ways we can barely imagine today. During a blizzard, keeping that fire burning was someone's full-time responsibility. They would bank the coals at night, adding just enough fuel to keep the fire smoldering until morning. Someone would wake in the cold darkness to add more wood or coal. The family arranged sleeping areas around this heat source, with the youngest children and the elderly nearest the warmth. Before a storm hit, families brought extra fuel inside, stacking it near the stove to dry and be ready. Running out of fuel during a blizzard could mean death, and everyone understood this reality without it needing to be spoken. Frostbite claimed toes and feet from countless people who did not protect their extremities properly. Our Black grandparents learned to wrap their feet in newspaper or cloth before pulling on thick wool socks and sliding into boots. This extra layer made a significant difference. Some would heat stones and place them in their boots before going outside, giving their feet a warm start against the cold. Others rubbed their feet with lard or bacon grease to create a moisture barrier. Wet feet in freezing temperatures meant danger, so they would change into dry socks immediately upon returning indoors, hanging the wet ones near the stove to dry for the next trip outside. When snow piled waist deep or higher, regular walking became impossible. Our grandparents relied on snowshoes, often homemade from bent wood and cord, to spread their weight across the snow surface. These shoes let them check on neighbors, reach where they kept livestock, and make their way to get supplies. Sleds served dual purposes. They transported supplies that would be impossible to carry, and they crossed terrain that defeated walking. Many families kept their sleds ready by the door during winter months, knowing they might need them without warning. Once automobiles became more common in Black communities, our grandparents quickly learned that these machines could become death traps in a blizzard. They began keeping emergency kits in their vehicles throughout winter. Blankets, candles, matches, non-perishable food, and water were standard supplies. Some kept a coffee can with a candle inside, which could provide enough heat in a closed car to prevent freezing. A small shovel, sand, or kitty litter for traction, and extra warm clothing completed the kit. These supplies saved lives when drivers became stranded on rural roads where help might not come for days, especially in areas where Black motorists could not count on assistance from passing strangers. When pipes froze or wells became inaccessible, snow provided drinking water. Our grandparents knew not to eat snow directly because that would lower body temperature dangerously. Instead, they would fill pots with clean snow and melt it on the stove. It took a surprising amount of snow to yield a small amount of water, but it was a reliable source when no other options existed. They collected snow from areas away from paths where animals or people walked, and they preferred fresh snow over older accumulation. This melted snow was used for drinking, cooking, and even cleaning when necessary. The patience required to melt enough snow for a family's daily needs taught children something about resourcefulness that no classroom ever could. Avoiding sweat saved many lives. This counterintuitive wisdom was passed down carefully through generations. When working hard in cold weather, the body sweats. That moisture then cools rapidly, dropping body temperature to dangerous levels. Our grandparents learned to pace themselves, removing layers before heavy exertion to prevent sweating through their clothes. They would work in shorter bursts, resting before they became overheated. If they did sweat, they would change into dry clothes immediately. No matter how inconvenient, this knowledge was especially important for those who had to work outside during storms, shoveling paths or gathering fuel. The phrase "slow and steady" was not just about patience, it was about staying alive. When stranded or when fuel ran low, people would huddle together to share warmth. This was not about comfort or emotional closeness. It was a calculated survival strategy. Body heat that would otherwise escape into the cold air could warm another person instead. Families would sleep in the same bed during the worst cold snaps. Everyone pressed together under piled blankets. Groups stranded in a building would gather in the smallest room and stay close. Churches sometimes became warming centers, where neighbors who had run out of fuel could come and share body heat with others. This collective warmth sharing could mean the difference between making it through the night and succumbing to the cold. Glass is a poor insulator, and the single-pane windows common in older homes let cold seep in relentlessly. Our grandparents hung heavy curtains, blankets, or quilts over every window during blizzards. Some would tack up extra fabric or layers of newspaper to add another barrier against the creeping chill. These coverings stayed in place around the clock during the worst weather. During brief sunny periods, they might pull the coverings back to let solar heat enter, then cover the windows again before sunset, trapping the warmth inside. This simple act could significantly reduce heat loss from a home and stretch limited fuel supplies further. When caught outside during a blizzard, finding or creating shelter from the wind became the first priority. Our grandparents knew how to stack snow blocks or pile snow to create a barrier against cutting winds. They would position themselves behind large rocks, in ditches, or against the windward side of buildings. Even a temporary reduction in wind exposure dramatically improved survival chances. Those who regularly traveled through areas with few natural shelters learned to identify locations where snow drifted in predictable ways that could provide protection. Reading the landscape became a survival skill passed from parent to child. Long before chemical hand warmers existed in stores, our grandparents created their own heat sources using what they had. They would heat rocks, bricks, or even potatoes on the stove, wrap them in cloth, and place them in beds to warm the sheets before climbing in. Hot water bottles filled from the kettle served the same purpose. These makeshift heat packs would stay warm for hours, providing comfort through the coldest nights. Children were often sent to bed with a heated brick wrapped in flannel at their feet. They would fall asleep in that cocoon of warmth, safe from the cold pressing against the windows. Similar to individual heat packs, heated stones became portable warmth distributed throughout the home. Our grandparents would line the area near the stove with flat stones that absorbed heat throughout the day. In the evening, these stones were wrapped in cloth and placed throughout the house. One might go to the rocking chair where grandmother sat to mend clothes. Another would be placed under the covers of each bed. Some were tucked inside coat pockets for those who needed to venture outside briefly. The thermal mass of stone held heat far longer than water, making stones ideal for this purpose. Families with cast iron stoves had an advantage, as the iron itself became a heat source that stones could rest against all day. Matches could get wet, and in an emergency, the ability to start a fire could save your life. Our grandparents kept fire-starting supplies in waterproof containers, often old tobacco tins or mason jars sealed tight. Flint and steel, along with dry tinder, were common. Some kept small pouches of char cloth that caught sparks easily, and char cloth could be made at home from old cotton fabric. These kits were carried when traveling and kept in multiple locations around the home. Everyone in the family old enough to understand learned how to use these tools. The skill of fire starting was passed down deliberately, practiced until it became second nature for even young children. Every crack and gap in a home was an entry point for cold air. Our grandparents would stuff rags into spaces around doors and windows. They would roll towels and place them at the base of doors to block drafts. Some mixed flour and water to make a paste that could temporarily seal larger gaps in walls or around window frames. Before a storm hit, they would walk through the house, feeling for drafts and addressing each one systematically. Keyholes were covered with fabric. Unused chimneys were blocked with boards or stuffed with rags. Any opening to the outside world was sealed against the invading cold. When other heat sources were inadequate, the oven became a supplementary heater. Our grandparents would bake bread, pies, and casseroles during the coldest days. The oven's warmth would spread throughout the kitchen and into adjacent rooms. After baking was complete, they would leave the oven door open to release the remaining heat into the house. This served double duty, providing warm food that would help bodies generate heat internally while also warming the living space. Many families did their heaviest baking during winter months specifically for this reason. The smell of fresh bread became associated with survival. Those caught in blizzards far from shelter sometimes dug into snow banks to survive. Our grandparents knew that snow, while cold, provides excellent insulation from wind and extreme temperatures. A properly constructed snow cave could be 30 or 40 degrees warmer inside than the outside air. They would dig in at an angle, creating a small chamber just large enough for their body. The entrance would be positioned lower than the sleeping area, allowing cold air to sink away. With body heat alone, this small space would warm to survivable temperatures. This knowledge saved lives when other shelter was not available. Beyond covering windows, heavy curtains served as room dividers during the extreme cold. Our grandparents would hang thick fabric across doorways to concentrate heat in the most used rooms. A home that might normally use 5 or 6 rooms would effectively become 2 or 3 during blizzards, with family members living in the warmest spaces until the worst of the storm passed. These curtains were often made from multiple layers of fabric, creating significant barriers to air movement. Heat that would otherwise spread thin throughout a house stayed concentrated where people actually lived. The body burns more calories in cold weather, and our grandparents knew to eat accordingly. Rich stews with fatty meats, bread slathered with butter, and hearty breakfasts with eggs and bacon were not indulgences during blizzards. They were fuel. Families would prepare high-calorie foods before storms hit, ensuring they had plenty to eat during the worst weather. The internal heat generated by digesting these foods helped maintain body temperature from the inside out, providing steady heat. They understood instinctively what science would later confirm about metabolism and cold weather survival. Wool was the material of choice for hand and foot coverings. Our grandparents often made their own mittens and socks. They knitted them thick and tight during autumn evenings. Mittens were preferred over gloves because keeping fingers together allowed them to share warmth. Double-layered construction was common, with an inner layer for softness and an outer layer for insulation. These items were inspected regularly for wear because a single hole could lead to frostbite. Losing a mitten was a serious matter, and children were taught to take extraordinary care of these essential items. Before sophisticated forecasting existed, our grandparents relied on radio reports, community networks, and their own observations to predict storms. They watched the sky for certain cloud formations, noted changes in animal behavior, and paid attention to pressure changes they could feel in their joints. When signs pointed toward a blizzard, they prepared immediately. Firewood was brought inside, water was drawn, neighbors checked on neighbors, especially the elderly living alone. Churches spread warnings through their networks. This vigilance gave families crucial hours to prepare. Thanks for joining us on this journey through our ancestors' wisdom. If you appreciated these survival methods, share this video with someone who remembers these days or who needs to learn them.